Hello and welcome to TaxCast, the podcast dedicated to exploring Australian taxation issues. This show is specifically crafted for owners of small to medium-sized accounting firms serving the SME market. I'm your host, John Jeffries, and this podcast is proudly brought to you by my business, John Jeffries Tax. Let's dive in. This is episode number 1 and it was recorded on the 17th of December 2024. In this episode I will discuss what has been put on the tax reform agenda by Allegra Spender MP, the federal member for Wentworth. I will also tell you about a major win for a taxpayer where a $33 million amount was held not to be assessable income. Let me start with a story, a memory that has stayed with me through the years. My great-grandmother, whom I called Grandma Mac, was born around 1886. She passed away when I was just 8, but even at that young age she left a lasting impression. One of my clearest memories of her was watching her cut her front lawn with a pair of scissors. Yes, scissors. Now, her lawn wasn't enormous, but even so, this task required extraordinary determination. She would kneel down and snip away, inch by inch, until the grass was perfectly trimmed. It was painstaking, back-breaking work, and yet she approached it with unyielding commitment. You might wonder why I'm reminiscing about Grandma Mac's lawn care on a podcast about tax reform. Well, whenever the topic of tax reform comes up, I find myself thinking of her. There's something about the slow, repetitive and often fruitless effort of cutting grass with scissors that mirrors the decades-long debate about tax reform in Australia. Let's unpack that. Tax reform, like Grandma Mac's lawn care, is a process that requires immense effort. It's slow, arduous and often seems to yield little progress. You make one small adjustment, a snip here, a snip there, only to find that the same issues have grown back, sometimes even more tangled than before. What's missing is the political will to grab a metaphorical lawnmower and address the problem comprehensively. This brings us to the focus of today's episode, Allegra Spender's Tax Green Paper. Released in November 2024, this document represents a bold attempt to kickstart meaningful conversations about tax reform in Australia. Spender, the federal member for Wentworth, is one of the so-called teal independents, and as an independent, her willingness to tackle such a contentious issue deserves recognition. Now let's take a closer look at the Green Paper itself. First and foremost, Spender's Green Paper isn't a policy blueprint. It's not a list of solutions ready to be implemented. Instead, it's a discussion starter, a framework designed to guide conversations about the future of Australia's tax system. Importantly, the paper doesn't delve into related but separate issues like government spending, the size of government, or the transfer system. While these topics are undeniably important, Spender has chosen to focus exclusively on the tax system. This targeted approach is both a strength and a limitation. By narrowing the scope, she can address tax reform with greater depth, but it also means some broader context is left unexplored. One key principle underpinning her recommendations is that tax reform should be tax neutral. In other words, any changes to the system shouldn't increase the overall tax burden. That said, Spender does express a preference for reducing the total tax take over time, a goal that aligns with her broader economic vision. The Green Paper begins by outlining the challenges Australia faces today. Let's break those down. The first is a generational wealth gap. For decades, each generation in Australia enjoyed a higher standard of living than the one before, but that trend is faltering. Younger Australians are struggling to achieve the financial security their parents and grandparents took for granted. Home ownership, once a cornerstone of the Australian dream, is increasingly out of reach. Over the past 25 years, home prices have quadrupled, while incomes have merely doubled. As a result, fewer Australians own their homes today than 40 years ago. This isn't just an economic issue, it's a societal one. The rising cost of living, coupled with large HECS debts, has led many young people to delay or forego having children. Spender rightly highlights this as a fundamental life choice being constrained by financial realities. The second part is stagnant productivity growth. Productivity is another area of concern. Growth is slower now than at any time in the past 60 years. This matters because productivity gains are the engine of economic growth. When we produce more with the same or less effort, we create value that can be shared across society. A third thing is declining business investment. Compounding the productivity problem is a decline in business investment. Without robust investment in innovation and infrastructure, it's hard to see how Australia can achieve sustainable growth. And the fourth point she makes is about climate change. As a Teal independent, Spender also emphasises the urgency of addressing climate change. She argues that the tax system should support, not hinder, the transition to a low-carbon economy. How does tax reform fit into this picture? While it's not a silver bullet, Spender argues that a fairer, more efficient tax system is essential to addressing these challenges. She highlights several key issues with the current system. Taxes on labour are too high, disproportionately affecting younger generations. The system rewards passive income and property investments over productive activities like work and innovation. Current settings fail to adequately incentivise business investment or support the energy transition. To address these issues, Spender proposes 7 priorities for reform. Number 1, lower income taxes for working Australians. 2, rebalance tax settings to promote home ownership. 3, incentivise innovation and business investment. 4, stabilise the revenue base in the face of demographic and consumption changes. 5, use tax policy to accelerate the energy transition. 6, establish a tax reform commission. 7, ensure thoughtful transitions to minimise disruption. Spender's Green Paper emphasises the need for immediate action in the next parliamentary term. This includes developing a structured tax policy process, engaging the community in meaningful dialogue, establishing an independent tax reform commission. These are ambitious goals, and history gives us plenty of reasons to be cautious. Over the past 40 years, Australia has seen countless reviews, conferences and debates about tax reform. Yet major changes, like the introduction of the GST in 2000, are rare exceptions rather than the rule. One of the biggest obstacles to reform is the politicisation of the tax debate. Too often, tax policy proposals are reduced to sound bites and scare campaigns. Politicians, eager to avoid controversy, adopt a small target strategy, keeping their ideas vague and uncontroversial. This stifles meaningful discussion and leaves us stuck in a cycle of inaction. Spender argues that the community must play a central role in breaking this cycle, but engaging the public in such a complex topic is no small feat. Tax policy is inherently complicated, and many people feel ill-equipped to participate in the debate. An independent tax reform commission could help bridge this gap, but for it to be effective, it must be genuinely independent, free from political interference, and empowered to explore bold ideas without fear of backlash. As someone who has spent decades observing Australia's tax system, I must admit to a degree of scepticism. The political landscape doesn't inspire confidence. Too often, tax policy becomes a bargaining chip in negotiations between competing interests rather than the product of thoughtful, evidence-based decision-making. That said, I applaud Allegra Spender for her courage and vision. Her green paper is a thoughtful and well-researched contribution to the tax reform debate. Whether it gains traction remains to be seen, but it's a step in the right direction. She ends her paper with a poignant question. The question we face now is whether we will tackle our challenges or slip back into politics as usual, waiting for a better window of opportunity which may never come while the problems grow larger and more intractable, or whether we create those windows of opportunity. The choice is ours. Now I'm going to explore a fascinating case, Chung versus the Commissioner of Taxation, recently decided in the Federal Court by Mr Justice Logan on November the 29th, 2024. This case is a gripping story of family, business loyalty, and a $33 million income dispute. Let's break it all down. First, a bit of background. This case centres around a man named Rene and his sister, Mrs. Leong, both members of the Chung family, originally from China but later living in Vanuatu. Rene and his sister were both born in Vanuatu during the Second World War. The family's story is one of resilience, starting from humble beginnings and building a successful empire in Vanuatu. Mrs. Leong, who played a pivotal role, was the sole owner of a flourishing supermarket chain, eventually employing over 600 people. Rene, meanwhile, moved to Australia in 1990, but remained closely involved in the family's business operations. Now here's where the case gets interesting. Between 2005 and 2015, Mrs. Leong, thinking Australia was a safe place to invest, began transferring substantial amounts of money, nearly $33 million, to Rene in Australia. The money was intended for investment purposes. Rene, trusting his sister's wishes and motivated by a deep sense of family loyalty, dutifully invested these funds in Australian properties and businesses. However, the Australian Taxation Office took a very different view of these transactions. They argued that the $33 million Rene received wasn't just a gift or capital to invest, it was income. The ATO alleged several theories. Number one, Rene was a part owner of the business and thus receiving business profits. Number two, the money represented payment for services Rene rendered to the business. Number three, alternatively, it was rental income from properties. Number four, or even as an ex gratia payment, a golden handshake for his past contributions. The stakes were enormous. If the ATO's claims stood, Rene faced a massive tax bill, penalties and interest. There was even a departure prohibition order placed on him in 2018, effectively preventing him from leaving Australia. Fortunately for Rene, Justice Logan, presiding over the case, didn't find the ATO's arguments convincing. After an exhaustive review of the facts, the court determined that these funds were gifts, not income. Justice Logan emphasised the deep sense of familial loyalty within the Chung Leong family, noting that Rene acted out of love and trust for his sister. He wasn't enriching himself. In fact, he lived a modest lifestyle despite managing millions. The court found no evidence to support the ATO's claims. In the judge's own words, the ATO's reasoning lacked an understanding of family reality and failed to approach the case with open-mindedness or detachment. This case also highlights a key concept in tax law: income versus capital. Justice Logan referenced previous High Court rulings, particularly the 1999 case of Montgomery. While analogies to past cases can be helpful, the court stressed that the fundamental test remains whether, in ordinary parlance, a payment is considered income. In Renee's case, the answer was a clear no. So, what are the takeaways here? First, this case is a stark reminder of the power imbalance between taxpayers and the ATO. The ATO pursued this matter aggressively, alleging fraud and evasion without concrete evidence. The process dragged on for years, causing immense stress for Renee and his family, both of whom are now in their 80s. Second, it underscores the importance of understanding the nature of payments in tax disputes. Whether a payment is considered income or capital has profound tax implications, and this case provides a critical example of how courts approach these distinctions. Finally, Justice Logan's call for the ATO to adopt greater open-mindedness in their assessments is a message not just for the tax office, but for all of us in the tax profession. Facts matter, and assumptions, no matter how compelling they might seem, must be backed by evidence. Let's take a moment to reflect on the remarkable resilience of families like the Chung Leong family. This case wasn't merely about money or taxes, it was a testament to trust, loyalty, and the unwavering support that binds families together. Renee, in particular, faced serious and deeply personal allegations about his integrity, enduring years of scrutiny and stress. In the end, the federal court found that the ATO had no evidence to support its claims. This outcome serves as a powerful reminder that in tax disputes, as in life, resilience and perseverance are often key. Sometimes you have to stand firm, trust the truth, and see the process through to its rightful conclusion. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of TaxCast. If you enjoyed today's discussion and want to dive deeper into more tax topics, don't forget to subscribe to TaxCast on Spotify or YouTube. If you haven't already, I invite you to explore the benefits of becoming a member of my website by visiting johnjeffreystax.com.au. On the website, you'll find a range of practical, downloadable tax training resources tailored to help small and medium-sized accounting firms navigate the complexities of the Australian tax and superannuation system. For more valuable insights and tips, be sure to check out the John Jeffreys Tax channel on YouTube. Once again, that's johnjeffreystax.com.au, your go-to destination for expert tax solutions and support. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.